morning, everyone. Can you see my screen all right?
Perfectly.
Great. So the first thing we'd love to do is just introduce ourselves. Trish, do you want to share a little bit about your district?
My name is Trish Bethard, and this is my 8th year as superintendent of the Brennan School District, the southernmost district in our county. And I'm going to look forward to telling you more about my district in a few minutes here.
Good morning, all. My name is Frank Redmond. I'm the superintendent of the Quilcene School District. It's my 5th year here in the district. And as Trish said, we're going to be doing a lot more details about our districts as we go along. I do want to make a quick acknowledgement, though, that we represent the 4 public schools in East Jefferson County. And just want to put it out there that we're going to talk about our public school context. We know that there are private schools that are facing many of the same issues as we are, but we don't speak on their behalf through our talk today.
Thanks, Frank, because I see Emily here from Swan School, so I hope she can join in at the Q&A. And so Chimacum and Port Townsend, about 2 years ago now, had a joint search for superintendent. And the result of that was that Scott Mock was appointed as the Chimacum superintendent last July, and I was appointed as the Port Townsend superintendent last July. And so we've been working together over the past year and a half because we share transportation and athletics, but we're a little different size. He has about 650 students, and I have about 1,150 students. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Trish to talk about our flow for today.
Today, we're going to share some information with you about just some statewide data about the impacts of the pandemic that we're just hopefully coming out of. Then each of us are going to talk to you about where are we now with academics and social emotional learning, and what are our next steps? What do we hope to do to bring some improvements? And then we'll allow some time for questions and answers. Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thanks. Frank, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, and again, we're speaking from the public school context, but we think that there's some universal truths that we saw in our schools, and certainly you've been seeing a lot of that in the national press. And that's that a lot of students are out of school for a long time. And between our 4 districts, it was kind of different for every district because of our size and what we're able to do. But for many students, they were away from public school or away from their classroom and away from their teachers and their peers for as much as 18 months. During that time, they weren't completely idle. They were engaging in all sorts of learning, although not necessarily the learning we may have intended. A lot of it was social media based. And so they saw things that maybe we didn't want them to see. They saw a lot of the political unrest that was so all-encompassing in our society for the past couple of years. And through that, they started questioning institutions like schools in ways that we hadn't experienced before. So last year, when we had all of our students return, those things led to increase in disciplinary issues, increase in absenteeism. We're seeing lots of our students with much more anxiety, much more depression, other social and emotional related kind of mental health issues that we've seen kind of in all of our schools. Again, you're hearing about this in the national press, but it's very much the case here in our local schools as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Frank. I'm going to talk a bit about the statewide test data that was released. I guess it was now a week ago, so that you can get a sense of the state picture. So these bar graphs were created statewide. We don't have them district by district. And what it was, the story that it was telling was that there was some recovery last year. So you see here the percentage of students who stayed proficient in both years, fall 2021, where they took the test for the previous year, and then spring 2022. You see students who accelerated into proficiency. So that's moving from a level 2 to a level 3. Students who made progress, but they didn't yet meet that threshold to be labeled proficient. And there were still some students who just maintained the progress or experienced a lack. But the interpretation from our state superintendent, Chris Reichdahl, was that COVID-19 had a significant impact, but the incredible work of educators and families to support students is evident in the recovery we're seeing across grade levels. So here is the picture of that impact here. So the darkest blue is spring 2019, before the pandemic. The yellow is fall 2021, when all 100% of students were back in person. And then the light blue is spring 2022. And you see across all grade levels, there was a dip, and then there is sign of recovery. And a little bit of the implications of this that probably impact a career and the economy moving forward is you can look here for those students who were proficient in English language arts, so reading and writing, what percentage graduated in 4 years, what percentage enrolled in post-secondary education, and attendance is a theme you'll see throughout here because attendance is very closely connected to academics. And something that I'm fortunate in Port Townsend the past 2 weeks, we've seen a big bump in attendance compared to last year. So I'm optimistic. And here are the math scores. So similar graph, but lower scores. And in Port Townsend too, we saw that our students took a dip in math more than ELA. And one theory is that we mentioned in Port Townsend, about 30% of the students' families chose to keep them fully remote for those 18 months. And it's probably easier for a family to say, go read a book, or let's write a letter to your grandma, but not to say, let's work on quadratic equations today. And so we saw a little bit more of a dip in math skills during the closure and remote instruction. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brennan for Trish.
Hey, I want to tell you a little bit about Brennan. Brennan is a very small school district. We have, I like the way you guys have your pluses and minus, or minus 80 kids, kindergarten through 8th grade. When I retired from very large systems in Texas to my summer cabin and went back to work, I just really had never been in a small system like this before. And what I found pretty quickly is it can be a pretty special place. It really is a school family. We've got brothers and sisters and cousins and in the same classrooms, and mamas and aunts and uncles teaching and supporting. So one of the things that we really do well is really build relationships. You know, all of the adults in the building, we know the mamas, and every one of us knows mama, grandma, aunt, uncle. We know all of them. They're our neighbors, and we really care deeply about the students and their families. We look at academic data and we plan very carefully, student by student, name by name, to maximize their progress. And we also really prioritize that social emotional learning. I think if you leave the social emotional part off, you're going to miss the academic as well, because kids have to be nurtured and cared for and healthy in that area to make that progress. Our demographics look a little different in Brennan. You'll notice that our low income number is pretty high. It's really the highest in the county. I think Queets over on the water, on the ocean, may have higher, but of our 4, we're the highest. For some reason, we have a lot of males. The most impactful number there is our low income, because with that comes a lot of challenges. So I want to share that with you. And this is what our data looks like that we just are getting in from our spring testing. And when I look at this, it's really never exactly where I want to be. I want us to be, I want us to continue to improve and improve. You'll see that some of this, it says data not available. We're so small that they mask the data if it's small enough to where specific students might be revealed. But I am proud of our progress, and I'm very proud of our academic performance. It's something we really, really prioritize at Brennan. We prioritize things like instructional time in the classroom. We're very selfish with that, and we try not to give it away easily. We were recognized by OSPI a few years ago as being a distinguished school that really specializes in closing gaps. And I think we have pretty reliably continued to do that with having some of the highest scores in the area. We're never where we want to be, but we're working. And as I just said, as she was transitioning slides, we're never where we want to be. When I look at that, I say, well, we don't, 45.7% passing math. That's not where we want to be. But but we're making good progress, and our scores, stand up well in the area. But our next steps are really digging down into those progress monitoring meetings at least 3 times a year, where we just look at the subjects kid by kid, name by name, with every single classroom as a team, and saying, how can we help this child? What does this specific child need? And it's kind of a time-intensive process, but it's really, really important work. I'm really excited that we were just awarded an intensive tutoring grant that will allow us to hire a tutor full-time for the remainder of this school year. And we're going to get that tutor very busy. We want to use the very best tools that are possible for all of our small group instruction settings. And we want to use really great tools for our online support. We want to use, and we tend to prioritize people over things. When you walk into Brennan, you're going to see that the classrooms are really flooded with support. And because we feel like our kids, especially from a social and emotional standpoint, really need people to care about them and love on them and spend time with them. We're going to really look at our response to intervention model, which means it sort of goes back to the progress monitoring. What's working? What isn't? How can we help you to be successful? Are you responding to the intervention we're providing? If not, what else can we do? And then we're going to continue with our inclusion training. What that means is we're a fully inclusive school. We want every child to be exposed to grade level expectations and grade level teaching and learning. I'm ready. I think staff culture is an example for classroom culture. It is very important for our staff to be kind to each other and for us to create a really warm school family. When I work with teams, and I sit on every single hiring team, when I work with teams to hire staff members, I really seek out, does that person have a love for children? And is that person going to be kind and be a really wonderful staff member? I can coach and teach many of the other skills, but I really can't coach and teach as well. Are you kind? And do you love kids? If you don't, this probably isn't a good match for you. I want you to walk into our classrooms and just feel the warmth hit you. I want you to feel those warm classrooms where the kids are sort of buzzing with a soft talk of learning, and the teacher and the support staff are up on their feet and instructing. But I want those classrooms to be warm and supportive, because that's where kids are going to learn. Counseling is really important, and we really try to make the most of our counseling services. When I look at the data put out by the county about counselors and how many sessions they're having, I want to be able to see that we really made the most of it. Because for the first time ever, we do have some counseling in the last few years. But for school districts, you don't just say, oh, counselor, it's nice to see you, and plop you in a room. I have to get very involved in, are there permission slips going out? What's the schedule look like? Is the counselor's schedule full, or do I need to step in and reach out and make some parent contacts? Can that counselor help with classroom support and small groups? And can that counselor wrap around our families? So counseling is fantastic, much needed, and lots of work. And then it's really important for us in Brennan to help connect our families to county resources. It's a distance for our kids and our families, but we really work hard to connect them. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thanks, Trish. That was great. Getting more insight about the work and the kids and everything that's going on down in Brennan. Quilcene, just up the road a little bit around Mount Walker. We're a little bit bigger. We have a couple of different programs, and that'll be important when we get into the numbers in a little bit. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But we have a resident program. Our K-12 school is for the folks who live inside the district boundaries. We have another program called Pearl, a parent partnership program, which is open to students from around the state. They don't come here. We interact with them online. So one of the things, as Trish mentioned, that is a real power for small school districts is that we know our students and our families very, very well. Our class sizes are tiny. Our first grade class this year is 4 students. We had to combine that with our kindergarten class of 8 students, but still combined all together, we're looking at a very small class, and that is similar to all of our classes. Our biggest class is about 25 students, and that's one of our combined high school classes. Our classes are small, and what that allows is for that relationship to develop, and for that the teachers and our staff to know our students very well. What we know about education is learning happens through relationships. And so those small class sizes really afford that. Another great thing that we have going for us is part of our size allows the students to get involved in lots of different things. I too come from larger school districts where you have sports that cut people out after a certain number because they can only have so many people on the team. They can only have so many people on stage and that sort of thing. What's great about our small school is everybody who wants to be involved can be involved. And that really helps students find their sense of place in the school. We have strong relationships with our community. As Trish pointed out, we know grandparents and aunts and uncles, and they're involved in the schools. We have several generations in a family that work here in the school. So we may have students, and we have a grandparent who's a teacher, we have a parent who's a board member. And so that kind of thing happens a lot. There's a lot of connectedness, again, which helps with those relationships. And then we are really forward leaning in that we're looking at how do we support every student? How do we make sure that that all of our teachers assume that every student is part of their family, that they want to develop those relationships and help every kid out. So we don't label kids and put them off into a box, but we make sure that every kid has those opportunities in every classroom to be really successful, not just academically, but also thinking about who they are as a whole human. How are they behaviorally? How are they socially and emotionally, as well as how are they academically? Next slide, please. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to monitor that on my screen as well. Okay, so similar, we have demographics. Our low income is 37.9. You can see the rest of the percentages there. This is where I want to talk a little bit about that Pearl program and our resident K through 12 program. The Pearl program is spread across the state, and it's parents who want to educate their kids in their homes, but want to have public school support. So our Pearl teachers work with the parents to provide them curriculum, to provide support, to do some online classes and that sort of thing, so that parents who have younger students, K-8, Pearl is a K-8 school, we can support those parents in teaching their kids at home. And then we have our resident students, which is, the folks who live here in Quilcene. Now, what the Pearl program and the K-12 program do when you combine all those numbers together is it skews our data. So our low income numbers of folks who live here in Quilcene, I know is much higher than 37.9%. It's more like about 50%, but again, our numbers kind of get pushed because we aggregate all the students in both of our programs. Similarly, our other demographics are skewed because of that inclusion of both Pearl and brick and mortar, we call it, together in one data set. Okay, I think we can go on to the next one. So like Trish, we have some numbers here that we don't like to see. There are definite losses that we saw between 2019 and our last round of testing. The graph that you saw earlier that showed the dip and then coming back up was the coming back up was between the spring and fall testing that we did last year. This data goes back to 2019. So on that graph, again, you saw that where most districts are in the state right now is that we're lower than we were in 2019. And our numbers certainly reflect that. One of the things that I think is particularly telling is that the low income numbers are generally worse than our non-low income numbers. So, and I think Scott is going to speak to this a little bit more about how this has affected students in Chimacum. But I think one of the big things that we learned through COVID is that students who are living in poverty have had a greater negative effect because of COVID and all the things that came out of COVID, the isolation, the limited connections to positive role models like teachers and their peers. So just something to keep in mind is that those numbers are troubling when we see that greater impact on students who are living in poverty. And again, we're doing a lot of things to address these numbers. They're troubling. We don't like that in general, we're at 35.8% of our students are showing proficiency in English language arts. That's troubling. It hurts our heart when we see that. And so we're trying to find lots of ways to help our students so they can be proficient in reading and writing and mathematics, because we believe those to be keys in success after they get done with school. So as we go on to the future slides, you can see what are some of those things that we're doing to try to address those numbers. So one of the things that we were able to do because of the federal funding, that's ESSER funding that we received, is we were able to hire more staff. And one of the things that we wanted to do to help address that negative dip because of COVID is hire someone who really pays attention to services that students need beyond what they get in their general education classroom. So if I'm struggling in my class, I want to make sure that I'm in that class all the time, but then I need something a little bit extra. And so we've hired an intervention teacher in both of our programs to help support those students so that they can get that little bit extra to make sure that they have every opportunity to succeed as possible. It's mostly about people, but it's also about materials. Again, we're using those extra funds for picking up instructional materials. Again, supplementary curriculum, we call it, to help bridge those gaps between where we want students to be, where we think they should be, and where they are. We're also looking at how we're supporting students, and we took a good hard look this year at how we had configured our support structure. So both intervention teachers, but also students with disabilities, special education personnel, we really kind of revamped that so that we could decentralize some of that to get the supports that students need in front of them a little more quickly. We can be a little more limber and agile by doing that decentralization of some of those support structures. And then, of course, I have some alphabet soup up there, some PBIS, UDL, and MTSS. So positive behavior interventions and supports is a really explicit way of helping students understand expectations around how they're supposed to interact with other students, how they're supposed to interact with teachers, how they're supposed to be in classes. So we've been working on that for a couple of years, that PBIS program. So we're continuing to focus on that to make sure students have the tools that they need so they can be behaviorally successful. At the same time, UDL is universal design for learning. Think about when you walk into a building, the structure of the building is universally designed so that everyone has access, wider doors, ramps, elevators, that sort of thing. So we're thinking about how do we do that from an instructional standpoint? How do we think about the variability that we see in all of our students and plan for that variability in each one of our lessons so that students, as they come in and they bring their best selves to the classroom, how are we including and incorporating that variability in how teachers plan to interact with those students and the lessons that they bring? Inclusionary practices, as Trish mentioned, we want our students to stay in their classes with their peers as much as possible. We want the just normal 4th, 5th grade class, English class, to be the best possible place for all of our students, and then provide supports for those students that need that extra support outside of those general education settings. And kind of what I'm describing there is called multi-tiered systems of support, or that's MTSS. And so those are kind of the 4 things that we're working on. It may seem like a lot of stuff, but it's all the same thing. It all falls under that umbrella of how do we find those multi-tiered ways of supporting students? How do we make sure that everybody gets a really solid baseline of their education, and that's academic, behavioral, social, emotional. And then for those students for whom that is not successful, how do we add something more on so that they can be successful in those 3 areas? This year, we've also revamped our middle school. We have all new middle school teachers. And so we're really kind of taking a look at how do we especially pay attention to that really funky time in a kid's life when they're going through puberty. At the same time, we're asking them to learn things like algebra and how to write more than a 5-paragraph essay. So really kind of rethinking that idea of what does middle school mean and how do we make that as an entity that has its own personality and has its own focus and yet sort of fits in with that larger picture that I was talking about before. And then something that is really important to us as well is, as I mentioned before, students bring their best selves into the classroom, and we really are working on how do we acknowledge that and welcome that and have the student's voice become part of the design of what we are learning and how we are learning and with whom we're learning. So increasing the ability of students to give them some agency in what and how and when and where they're learning. And so we see some real power in that. We know that as adults, we like to have a lot of input into our work environment. Students are exactly the same. So we're working on increasing that. So our next steps, one of the things that you'll hear a lot is that students need extra stuff, extra counseling. They need for that, those social emotional needs that really kind of got brought into the limelight through COVID. We were able to get some grant funding to help get extra people here. Like Trish was saying, they're increasing counseling. We're able to do the same thing, which is great. We're really happy to have those grant funds. The troubling part is at some point those grant funds are going to run out, but the student need won't. So something that we consider all the time as school leaders is how can we help the legislature understand this really important need to fund this critical aspect of education around making sure that students' mental health and socio-emotional needs are being taken care of just as much as we take care of their academic needs. Our strategic plan includes a wellness goal that kind of goes along to the same way, but it's the same thing as the SEL or socio-emotional needs. But we also want to make sure that they have great access to good food and they have access to movement and exercise. All of that fits within our wellness goal to pay attention to the whole people, right? What do they have for lunch? What do they have for breakfast? How are they moving around? How often are they moving around? What sorts of things they're learning about themselves as humans? A program that we're really happy about here in Jefferson County is the Student Assistance Professionals. We have a great guy, Alex, who is kind of filling the gap between a mental health counselor and someone who just needs to talk to you, right? He's that guy that if students are like having a bad day, they can go talk to Alex, get some things off their chest, get refocused and go back into class. It's kind of in between a really intense need for a counselor and just, kind of feeling bad for the day. It's really wonderful to have that program here in the county because he is busy every day. Every day he's talking to kids, and sometimes it's one kid at a time, sometimes it's groups of kids. Fantastic resource. And then we're looking at both how we're supporting those socio and emotional needs for students by working with the whole class. That's the push-in service where we have our counselors, our guidance counselors, and our mental health counselors go into a class and work with everybody about things like anti-bullying and some other aspects of just, how do they interact with each other and support each other as humans. And then all the way up to a student that may need to come out of a class to get that really intense services. So again, along the lines of those multi-tiered systems that we're erecting to make sure that we're helping students out with those, their emotional needs that have become so apparent to us in recent months. I've talked a lot really fast. I'm going to turn it over to Scott. I believe you're up next. And welcome, Scott. Good to see you.
Thanks, Frank. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming this morning. So really briefly, last year we went through a process similarly to Port Townsend, and Linda and I being in our first years of doing some strategic planning. And it really started with refreshing our mission and vision. And rather than write a mission and vision, we really felt it was more appropriate to write a purpose and a promise. Our purpose that we can all point to and say, this is why we are here, is to be a caring community for courageous learners. And the next bullet is our promise. We wanted to be able to say to our community and to our kids, this is what we are going to endeavor to do. This is what we're going to do that we can hang our hat on, so that every student is known by name, strength, and need, and inspired to learn, dream, and become. Frank and Trish spoke to this really eloquently. I don't have much to add other than that the four of us are relatively unified in how we understand relationships, wellness, and inclusion and belonging. So I'm going to try not to be as redundant with what they've said, but just to check that is a priority for us too. So after we created a purpose and a promise, we were able to articulate 5 strategic areas of our work. And our strategic plan fits on a page, which we're pretty happy about. I think strategic plans sometimes can get us into a space where we can't deal with an uncertain future. And rather than sort of say, well, we predict 5 years out, the world will be this way. And so our strategic plan will get us there, or will step us towards that predictable world. We don't think the world is that predictable. So we do think that we have some strategic areas to focus in. First of all, relationships. Trish and Frank articulated this beautifully. Linda will as well. They're really mission critical. The relationships among staff, the relationships we have with our community, the relationships we have with our kids, and promoting relationships among all of those groups. Instructional quality is also really critical. Both my colleagues have also spoken about aspects of instructional quality that really kind of boil down to engaging students in relevancy and rigor, that the things that they're doing are meaningful to them, and that they're putting a lot of their brain power and they're having a relationship with what we're doing, a relationship with the curriculum. Collaboration is also really important, that people are getting together and talking about data, and they're making decisions about instruction based on data, colleagueship, and that kind of thing. We really want to avoid collaboration, where we just have time where adults get together and they talk, but they don't really move the needle very much, because we haven't really honed our skills around how we talk about what we're doing. Wellness is also a priority. Again, food, making sure that staff have time during the workday to take care of themselves, and ensuring that our social and emotional work with students and staff is taken care of. One of the innovations that we started last year is called Wellness Wednesdays. One early release day a month. That's when all of the students go home an hour early, and our staff normally get together to do that collaborative work. But one day a month, they can choose to do a wellness activity, either in an affinity group that goes walking or cycling or does yoga, or gets together and plays ukulele, or we bring in massage therapists, nutritionists, and other practitioners to work with them. And lastly, really trying to create that sense of connection to school and to other people, with inclusion and belonging as a priority. Next slide, please. So these are just briefly our demographics. These are from OSP, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. So it's a little bit of a blunt instrument to measure some of these things, but generally speaking, we don't look very dissimilar from Brennan and Quilcene, although when you go south to north, there's a strange correlation between south to north around poverty. The farther south you go, the more poverty there is. The farther north you go, the less there is, but we're not that far off of each other. So just to be really clear, our current numbers are about 681. We projected to have 654 this year. So we're a little higher than we thought we'd be, but we're generally becoming less white. We have more students that are identify as 2 or more races. We're seeing more students who don't speak English as the first language at home. And we're seeing more students that identify as Latino. So these are some really, we think, really great things happening in our district, the diversification. The thing that's just stuck with us is that poverty. And our poverty rate fluctuates somewhere between 54 and 58%, depending on how you slice it. Next slide, please. So again, this is our sort of shot in time, our snapshot in time of where we are academically, just with English language arts and math. And honestly, the 4 of us look at disaggregated data all the time, which means we're looking at different student groups, grade levels, demographics, all kinds of things. But we all really wanted to show you kind of the big picture idea, which is none of us is where we'd like to be. The context matters, that COVID has been really devastating for our kids. And when we talk about the effects of poverty mixed in with COVID, we start to see stressors on kids that aren't just one or the other, but both at the same time. And they have synergy in the wrong direction. So these are our numbers too. Again, if you look at our low income numbers, they're not where we'd like them to be. And to Frank's point earlier, the students who are low income are less likely to come to school. So our chronic absenteeism is higher amongst low-income students. Students are more likely to be referred for discipline by about 3 to 1 in our school district. And they're less likely to do after-school activities. Their DNF rate at the secondary level is higher. I mean, so across the board, we are not serving our low-income students as we would like to be. Next slide, please. So really quickly, I wanted to kind of pause us all. This is the bridge. If we were a song, this is the bridge. So the bridge is that all of us are dealing with chronic stress in our students in poverty. So those things have to do with all the things that come up, whether it's parents stressing about paying rent or mortgages, or whether it's getting medical care, or whether it's mental health care or paying for gas. All of the things are major stressors. The perfect storm for our students is COVID. So when you stack all those things together, you get a situation where students are struggling to do basic executive function, decision-making, being motivated, communicating thoughts and feelings in a more regulated way. All of those things. What they look like to people is dysregulation, kids getting angry, maybe being impulsive, things like that. Those are not, I would say, like, we have to sort of figure out how to suspend judgment around that and look at our own biases around poverty. And this really starts to help. I'm going to say one other thing about this. As you saw in the intro to this program, is there's concern across the country about the NAEP scores. The NAEP is sort of a barometer of international test scores in math and English language arts, et cetera, literacy. And the New York Times reported that we've lost decades in terms of test scores. I want to comment about that really quickly. We are way better at doing this whole public education thing than we were 30 years ago. So as you saw, test scores in the NAEP improve over time, and now they've gone back down. We're not where we were in the 80s. Okay, so when we start to despair about where we're going, I just want to be really clear. Like, we know what to do. We just need the resources and the time to get it done. Next slide, please. So in my district, really just trying to break this down around our 5 strategic areas. So instructional quality really means that we're going to be able to engage our kids and create readiness and academic achievement. And so a couple key areas are differentiated instruction. So as Frank talked about, universal design for learning, it's like it's having your curriculum and your instruction accessible by everybody. Relevant place-based curriculum. Our students are in the Valley. They're doing stuff that matters. We're doing construction trades, which is a necessary skill for many of our students because we need it in our community. We need people that can do construction, those kinds of things. We really also want to build our thinking strategies when we talk about literacy. So our students are diving more deeply into the things that they're reading and consuming. Collaboration is super critical based on data that preschool through 12th grade, we are aligned. One of the things that you'll start to see in all of our schools is how we are actually putting a lot of energy and thought into what we're doing for 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds, and 6-year-olds, because those are key times for us to create kids that can be successful in school. Next slide, please. And then the last 3 relationships that really building our community partnerships is very critical to us. Our board has articulated a board policy around community partnerships, and we have met with about 18 or 20 different community partners in the board meeting setting to talk through what our partnerships look like and how we can mutually benefit each other. We are really trying to build trust and communication where it's been lacking here in the Chimacum School District. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. Trust can be broken and people can be wounded, and it just takes rolling up your sleeves and just keep having at it. And again, I talked about wellness a little earlier, so nothing new to add there. And then lastly, inclusion and belonging. Like my colleagues, we're really interested in student voice and trying to get better at how we incorporate that. We have we have had students on our school board for 10 years, and we are better at it in the last 2 years than we've ever been. And we have 2 really terrific board members that have a lot of say in our decision making. And then we, like Brennan and Quilcene, our kids are known from the time they walk in the door. Some of them are known at birth, right? It's a small community, and so it's easy to do. And safety is a critical part of what we're doing as well. And so lots of physical upgrades to our campuses using local capital levy dollars, and lots of adjustments to how we lock doors, egresses, entrances, things like that, that just make people feel a lot safer. Next slide, please.
Oh,
That would be all I have to say.
great. Thank
Linda.
you, Scott. Like Chimacum, Port Townsend went through a process last year of refreshing our strategic plan, and here it is on one page. So we have 3 goals we track: student attendance, progress that students make every year on those state assessments, and also are they prepared for life. So we have enrollment into post-secondary programs and persistence in those programs and income data that we look at. And our Port Townsend Schools promise is that every student will be known, supported, and engaged, and graduate with the skills to thrive in the world and change it for the better. And so the way that we do that, we have a lens of equity throughout. So equity for students who are experiencing poverty, equity for students of different racial groups. And for engaging students, the 3 strategies we use are choices for students, place-based learning, and real-world connections. And for knowing and supporting all students, the 3 strategies we use are promoting wellness for all, matching instruction to student need, and partnering with families and community. So our school district is the largest of the 4 here, with last year was 1,179. And you'll see here that we had 77% of our students are white, and 9% 2 or more races, 9% Hispanic, Latino of any race. And our low income rate last year was 46%. And our proficiency levels did see that same dip from 2019 before the pandemic to last spring. And we have that very large gap between the performance with our students who are low income and non-low income. And the way that the state calculates low income is related to the federal free and reduced price lunch data. So a family of 4 would need to make under $51,300 a year in order to be eligible for that reduced lunch and be categorized as low income. And here are just some examples of those strategies I used. And the picture down in the corner is the Wooden Boat Festival last Friday. And while our juniors were at the Wooden Boat Festival, our seniors were touring Jefferson Healthcare, PUD, and the Boatyard to really think about their careers and connections to careers. And our juniors at the Wooden Boat Festival also saw a panel of recent graduates who are working in the maritime industry. And our social emotional development next steps, we've doubled our support with deans, counselors, and a new role, the director of wellness. And we focus a lot on our disciplinary responses. We mentioned earlier that there have been more incidents on campus, and we're focusing on, instead of suspending the student and then the student comes back and might even be more angry, how do we promote wellness by responding in a way that acknowledges the harm done, brings people together to talk and learn and heal. Family partnerships for student learning is very important for us. And also I mentioned equity, the impacts of poverty. So I see here Jefferson Transit Authority, Nicole helping out with brainstorming around transportation. The food co-op was here thinking about food security, transportation security for those students who are experiencing poverty, and then identity development. So you see here pre-K students with their self-portraits. How do we make sure every student, white, Hispanic, 2 or more races, Black, Chinese, feels good about who they are, feels like they belong in our schools? And I went fast so that we have more time for questions. Thanks everyone for listening to us. And it was great, the 4 of us being able to work together on this. So thank you, Arlene, for inviting us.
Thank you all. This was fabulous, for a tremendous insight, great information. And thank you for all the work you're doing to ensure the future of our youth and these amazing educational resources. I am so inspired with the level of instructional quality and creativity that you put on the table, and particularly the focus on wellness and equity. I think that's fabulous. And I know that I have learned a lot. Thank you, Frank, for explaining all those new acronyms that I did not understand. I appreciate that. And I have a feeling that there are some questions in the group that I'm going to address first. And we have some questions that have come in from Facebook. So let's change the view here so that I can see your hands go up, whether those are virtual hands or the little wavy thing. Questions? All right, well, why don't I start you off? Wait, I have one from Jay Bass. Jay.
First off, I want to just thank and congratulate all the superintendents for the great work that they're doing in our school districts. It's very encouraging. I have a big interest in math education, and I noticed that I don't know, I get the feeling that all of the school districts would like to see that better. Would you be amenable to at least talking about some programs that I'm aware of? I don't want to get into too much of the detail, but they've been successful in many different areas, but they don't come from large educational companies. There might be a little bit different in the way you think about things, but they have been successful, and they're on the train the trainer or train the teacher model. So you would come in and you would train our teachers to then use these systems. Is that something that would be possible to talk about?
I'll speak out. I'm
go
interested
ahead.
in math curriculum that is aligned to our Washington state standards, of course, and I would be interested. I did want to point out that I think math is, we see the effects of the pandemic even more in math than we do in reading. It's just math is a little bit more linear, and when you pop out for a bit in math, you're kind of left with a mess. So math is tough, but I think we'd certainly be interested if you email us and share that with us. We'd be interested to see it.
Okay.
I have just one comment to make about math, and hopefully this is helpful perspective. Most of our curriculums are aligned with Washington state standards, national standards. In my view, the curriculum isn't the problem. What our instruction needs to catch up with where kids are. So how we're teaching, not what we're teaching. So to Frank's point about universal design for learning, we need to make the curriculum accessible for all kids. And that through the pandemic, that needle we're threading is a lot smaller, right? And so it's really, really hard to differentiate for this bigger gaps in your student population. So the second thing is that efficacy is huge. People generally identify as I'm not good at math or I am good at math, right? They don't identify that way with other subject areas. And you have parents who will say, and it's by habit, right? It's not they're trying to destroy their kids' math efficacy, but they'll say, well, I wasn't very good at math, so you're probably not going to be very good at math either, or something to that effect, right? So, I think if we can shift those two things, honestly, to your point, Jay, I think our math is going to be a lot better. So that's my take.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right, I will get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's interesting. We had a Facebook question. We have a bunch of Facebook questions, but one of the ones that came in, you guys sort of vaguely touched on with your wellness programs, but it had to do with food insecurity and how the districts are handling that, given our level of poverty. And when we had our meet and greet with your new teachers and staff, one of the things they were all concerned about was that hungry students can't learn. So what are we doing in our district?
Well, because of our poverty level, we participate in the community eligibility program where every child at the school eats free breakfast and lunch. And we had that benefit during COVID for everybody, but because of our poverty level, we'll continue to be able to have that for our kids. We also apply for the fresh fruit and vegetable snack program. So they get a fresh fruit or vegetable snack every day. We have education that goes around that. All of us have the benefit of that backpack program where any child that fills out the paper, you don't have to have any indicator that you need it, but you can have the weekend backpacks. I mean, all of us have really dynamic food banks, and so that's been really great. And we try to provide really top-notch food when we can.
Unfortunately, the census data in the Port Townsend School District did not make us eligible for that community eligibility program. And we are seeing some of our students whose families might be just above that poverty line saying, oh, I can't take a lunch because we can't afford it. And so we're really working through that. We've had some community members offer to pay for the lunches, but we have to figure out how we might structure such a thing. There was an announcement from Washington State that next year they will go back to free meals for all.
That is good to hear. That is good to hear. And thank you, Scott, for the link. Please look at the link in the chat that Scott Mock put up. There's another question from the group before I launch into another Facebook question for our team. I think that one of the questions, and it may be best answered by our Swan School attendee, and that is they wanted to know, and I know that there's a lot of it here, but what place-based or subject-based like art, music, or agriculture, or other schools, public or private, are options now in Jefferson County?
I apologize. I'm homesick today, so I'm not going to turn my camera on, but and
Oh,
spare all of
there.
you. Yeah. But first of all, I think the first thing that I should say is that I am also a parent of a child who is now at Blue Heron, and I do think that that there's a misconception that a lot of our public schools are not place-based, and I think that the PT public schools do an amazing job of place-based education. Because we are a smaller school, our population this year, we typically have a population between about high 50s, low 70s in our students. We're able to pivot a little bit more. So we're able to be out in the community a little bit more. When we had to respond to the pandemic, we moved all of our operations outside. So we all taught outside for 2 straight years, which means that we didn't suffer a lot of the same learning loss. And I think that it's a testament to my incredible staff that was able to completely redo all of their education training to suddenly be teaching outdoors. But it also says really a lot for just how important attendance is, because we have about the same percentage of free and reduced price lunches that our kids have. And even though our kids are able to be in the field and be out, we have not seen the same kind of learning loss at all, because children have been able to be present. And there are a number of other independent schools, and there are also some alternative options available through the public schools and I will let everybody else talk about those as well. But we are one of the independent schools that provides that kind of option for kids in the community. But I feel really lucky to be in a community that provides lots of options across the board. And I just, again, don't want anybody to think that that's not available through public schools as well.
Thank you, Emily. And yeah, anybody from the team want to step up and talk a little bit very briefly about what's going on in your schools? I know that place-based learning is just a feature of Jefferson County for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about all the things that our students are doing in the community, everything from working with DNR on doing some rehabilitation in the area, to every day that our preschool is in session, they take a walking field trip in the community, and everything in between. So we're very grounded in the community and being in the place here in Jefferson County with our students across the grade span. So I believe that it is a cornerstone of what we do here in Jefferson County. We may not advertise it as such, but our students are out in the field, so to speak, all the time.
Thanks, Frank. I want to thank all of you, Linda, Scott, Frank, Patricia, for really doing a fabulous job today and educating all of us. So we appreciate you and the work that you do.